Welcome to History Mystery. Watching it may be a sin, but like a very famous misprint of the King James Bible, sin on more! As you may be aware, it's officially Gay Month. In America, we celebrate Pride Month in February in the United Kingdom, but globalization is a thing. While consumerism can leave a bad taste in your mouth, that I'm sure is all too familiar for us gay men out there, it's not quite as bad as what Thatcher tried to do to us back in the 80s. And if you are one of those straight people that's starting to find arms dealers telling you they love everyone equally a bit obnoxious, and don't worry, I understand. Getting your movement co-opted isn't too fun either, but it might be a good idea to understand why we're here, why we're queer, and why it's better than the alternative, because it is in every single way. You getting a bit annoyed about a Pride Tesco club card is really not the end of the world. I'm pretty open about what I get up to, or should I say, who I'm genetically disposed to falling in love with, if you want to be specific, which of course has attracted me some detractors. He supports porn, nudity in movies, adultery, and is super LGBT. That's right, I'm not just LGBT, as in all four of them, at the same time, together. I'm a super LGBT. While he doesn't like it when I'm open about my sexuality, the only reason I know about him is because he's a sleazy admirer of other history YouTubers. He's also another history YouTuber. Time's up on that. So let's talk about his dream, the gays getting punished for being the naughty boys that they are. Wait. You know that for a long time, teaching people that gays merely existed was illegal in the United Kingdom. I know, it's as stupid as it sounds. Not just you couldn't do gay sex ed or you couldn't say that gay marriage is fine, pretty much that they couldn't exist. This was the result of a rather infamous law called Section 28, and today we're going to go through how it came about and how it eventually disappeared. Now, the 1980s were a tough time for almost everyone. Sure, you look back now at people's ridiculous clothes and the top music and think, wow, that's brilliant. But for every faith and everything she wants, there's a wham rap to go along with it. While the economy in terms of numbers and the city was fine, probably, the mine closures marked a rather traumatic moment in British history for millions of people. The Troubles and the Cold War waged on with seemingly no end in sight either. But way worse than all of those, the government was hell-bent on telling you what you can and can't like. Ironically, for a government so mortified by sex itself, and to be fair to Maggie, I would be if I was coming home to Dennis Thatcher every night, Thatcher's government had quite the boner for banning things even vaguely risque. It started with films, where the government and censor czar James Furman famously declared war on video nasties. Movies too violent for imaginary children, these films definitely weren't aimed at. Social crusader Mary Whitehouse and her festival of shite were stirring up any problem they could find as a sign that civilization itself was crumbling, and up until the end of the 80s and going into the major years, Acid House was going to cause your kids to take ecstasy and have fun, and neither of those things are allowed, are they? Mainstream society was, as you can tell, quite conservative at the time, and it's not a surprise that accepting gay people wasn't really something people bothered with. Being gay in the United Kingdom in some form had only been legal since 1967, in living memory. Though there were some interesting restrictions put on gay men when it was legalised. First of all, everyone had to be over 21. Sure, start a family at 16 and get married. Vote for us and sink the Belgrano at 18, but no bum fun until you're 21. And everyone involved is doing some heavy lifting there, because it meant only 2 consenting adults in a private property. Well, that's my Friday night ruined. Thanks, government. Of course, straight adults weren't under the same regulations. You could have all your keys in the bowl parties, Thatcher. Ugh. I mean, even if it was legal, that doesn't mean it was accepted. I mean, being gay is technically legal in Hungary, but try showing this video to a Fidesz rally. Well, the MEP that got caught at the gay daddy orgy might have to excuse himself, but anyway. At the start of the 80s, there were no openly gay people in Parliament, barely any gays in the media, and if they were, they had to largely hide it, even if it was now legal. And let's not even start on lesbians or trans representation at this time. But things did change in a few major ways, and not all of these were positive. The 80s is best remembered as the beginning of the HIV/AIDS pandemic, and that killed thousands of people, predominantly gay men, and wiped out an entire generation of our culture. Many more informed people have covered the AIDS pandemic in a much more detailed way and in a much more respectful way than I think I could really ever do on this show. But suffice it to say, it was a bleak and scary time, actively made worse by the apathy of the religious and the ignorance of the Conservative government. Whilst gay men were dying from a preventable health crisis, Thatcher's government and the Tory establishment had different ideas.
Children who need to be taught to respect traditional moral values are being taught that they have an inalienable right to be gay.
The Daily Mail, aka the 2 Minute Hate from 1984, printed lots of gay-bashing crap over the decade. Famously, they covered the printing of a children's book titled Jenny Lives with Eric and Martin that contains, shock horror, a same-sex couple looking after a child. And of course, trust the Daily Mail to be on the far right side of history because supporting Mussolini just wasn't enough. Now, obviously not everywhere in the world was quite as backwards as the UK. As you can probably tell, there were children's books being published on the topic. Jenny Lives with Eric and Martin was originally written by a Danish bloke. And across Europe, there were early gay pride events everywhere. Even communist Yugoslavia had a gay festival in the mid-80s. Going back to Jenny Lives with Eric and Martin, in 1986, a single copy was found on the shelves of a public library somewhere in Greater London. Obviously, this was some sort of conspiracy by the gay lobby to turn the next generation of schoolchildren into Labour-voting super gays. As if closing the minds and just telling the North to f*** off wasn't going to do that. The Tories banked on this moral panic hard and capitalised on it in every way possible. In the 1987 election, the Tories came out with this advert, which sort of serves as foreshadowing for what they planned on doing. Now remember, this poster was printed in living memory in a Western liberal democracy by the party that is still in power to this day. And of course, this specific electoral promise had to be followed, and so in December 1987, Conservative MP David Wilshire proposed some amendments to an upcoming local government bill.
A local authority shall not intentionally promote homosexuality or publish material with the intention of promoting homosexuality. Nor can they promote the teaching in any maintained school of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship.
David Wilshire. What a
Any remarks made about members of Parliament are opinions expressed for comedic effect.
I mean, the thing is it's hard not to be contemptuous when you're talking about these people. Because let's not forget the fact that everyone involved in this story actively tried to suppress people's rights, and it's really hard to talk about that, especially when it's your own people, without getting quite upset. Doing this and researching it was, a bit distressing. But I guess I'm a consummate professional. You have to rise above that, and I guess calling everyone a c*** doesn't necessarily do your side any favours. So, yeah. Right, let's keep going. Now, his amendment was met with opposition and was heavily debated in the House of Commons. I've read a fair amount of the debates on Hansard, and here's a summary of David Wilshire's entire set of beliefs. Yeah, it's entirely indefensible and characteristic of a shit and nasty man who tries to wiggle his way out of any real responsibility. I mean, what other way can you interpret this?
Section 28 of the Local Government Act has got nothing to do with homosexuals. It has got everything to do with using public money to promote homosexuality. That is very different. If there is prejudice, if there is bigotry, if there is discrimination, it exists anyway. And Section 28 was a reflection of that rather than the cause of it.
To sum it up, he didn't like local government spending money on any sort of gay outreach, or anything really. And of course, talking about the gays, or merely suggesting that we exist, is an affront to something or whatever. I mean, to be fair to him, the Thatcher government thought you shouldn't spend money on anyone. So when you think about it, David Wilshire was really a champion for equality. There's also some of David Wilshire's cronies I'd like to give some credit to. Tory MP Harry Greenaway complained that councils were wasting money on gay events to the tune of £2,000. Okay, it's not really money to the government, is it? You know, this was all in a country that spent 5% of its GDP on defence that same year. But of course, it gets worse. Elaine Bowman, MP for Lancaster, started her remarks by saying that sodomy and buggery was uncivilised. She then went on to openly support an arson attack on a gay magazine. At the very least, she didn't try and weasel her way out of her open hatred, but bloody hell. It is disgraceful that the Speaker of the House didn't really attempt to challenge this, merely asking everyone to cool the temperature of the debate. Also, there was this one classic line from Ken Livingstone that really sums up the whole debate. Some people have the misfortune to believe what they read in the Daily Express, the Daily Mail, and the Sun. I want that on a t-shirt. And by all means, fair play to him, and Dr. Jack Cunningham, and Tony Benn, Tony Banks, Chris Smith, the first openly gay MP, Simon Hughes, and countless others who had to put up with this insane bullshit from Tory backbenchers. Livingston also points out one of the more insane points about all of this. There are millions of LGBTQ people in the United Kingdom, and their future and right to dignity is being debated by a clause tacked onto a bill about when your bins are collected. Neil Cash for Questions Hamilton was also against it, in response to a disgustingly homophobic cartoon depicting the lynching of a gay man by the Sun newspaper, you know, the ones who lied about Hillsborough, those guys, suggested that the cartoon was made because of the aggressive proselytising by some local authorities on behalf of homosexuals. This was just after said cartoon, which for legal reasons I can't show you, was rightfully compared to the anti-Semitic Nazi propaganda of the 1930s. There was also a moment where David Wilshire got absolutely wrecked for quibbling over terms. At one point, Dr. Jack Cunningham points out that Section 28 will enforce a negative image of gay people onto society, to which David Wilshire responds, "Could you distinguish between positive and negative images?" And this playing dumb was helpfully repudiated by Dr. Jack Cunningham, who said,
"We all know what negative images are. We have seen them throughout history. There were negative images of Jews and immigrants. Now we have a negative portrayal of homosexuality. If the honourable gentleman does not understand that, he is not really fit to be a member of this house."
Absolutely destroyed with actual facts and legitimate logic. For example, Tony Benn's little diatribe does a much better job unpicking how ridiculous this all was than I ever could.
If the sense of the word promote in promote homosexuality can be read across from describe, every murder play promotes murder, every war play promotes war, every drama involving the eternal triangle promotes adultery, and Mr. Richard Branson's condom campaign promotes fornication.
Tony really was one of the good ones. Eventually, in May 1988, as part of the Local Government Act of 1986, good to see it was current and of the time even back then, the bill passed. Across the country, the gays were in outrage and wanted to stonewall the government. Thousands of gay men, lesbian women, and bisexual people took to the streets demanding the equality that we deserve. The bill's passing was rather famously protested by a group of militant lesbians who descended on the news at 6.
Good evening, the headlines at 6 o'clock. In the House of Lords, a vote is taking place now on a challenge to the poll tax. Tory rebels have said that the tax...
Unfortunately, this protest amounted to not very much. The law was passed. If your school broke Section 28, you could take them to court and judges would be able to fine the school and potentially prosecute the teachers. And when it is taught at school, usually at A-level, so only a scant few people know about it, it doesn't really talk about the effect that it had on people.
You know, the common consensus with Section 28 is that it stopped people being able to talk about anything. There was just this weird restriction where you just couldn't really say anything. You just didn't want to say anything in case you got into trouble. The common underlying thread that everyone that I've spoken to about Section 28 and how it impacted them is that it meant that people just couldn't talk about who they were and the problems that they were facing. Imagine what it was like not being able to tell anyone. And even if you did want to confide in someone, like a teacher or a figure of authority, knowing that they can't say anything back to you, otherwise they might get in trouble with the police. That is the reality of Section 28. It's not just stopping children from reading books about same-sex marriages. It fundamentally breaks people. It breaks down people's ability to talk about even the most basic parts of their own humanity.
But after the bill passed, something unexpected happened. The 1990s. Things started to get a lot more progressive very quickly. At the start of the decade, Outrage and Stonewall were formed, primarily to campaign against Section 28, but also to defend us from bigots who wanted it to go further. 1994 saw the passing of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act. While it did basically ban raves, it did make the age of gay consent that bit closer to being equal in the UK. 1996 saw highly active antiretroviral therapy made available on the NHS, which almost overnight stopped the transition of HIV to AIDS in many patients. 1997 saw Tony Blair and New Labour get elected, and the country as a whole starts to really feel a lot more socially liberal. 1999, I was born, obviously the most important achievement of the time. 2000 saw gay people being let into the military for the first time openly, and finally the 2-person limit on sexual distancing was lifted by the European Court of Human Rights. 2001, the Netherlands legalised same-sex marriage, and we finally make the age of consent equal in the UK. And so things are finally starting to get better. 15 years on from Section 28's passing, we're now ready as a country to repeal it. Or are we? Yes, actually we are. And then we get to 2003. Section 28 was still in place, but the world is very different. By that time, there had been a bit of a shake-up in how schools were managed, and sex education was now nationally controlled, not locally controlled, meaning some of the wording in Section 28 was obsolete. It was dead in the water and largely a symbolic injustice, but still an injustice nonetheless. And besides, all it takes is a different government to get elected, and then they can start using it for themselves. That's how it always works. In 2000, the House of Lords tried to repeal it, but their efforts were stopped by an organised opposition, created by a Tory peer called Baroness Janet Young. She really wasn't. Janet had spent a good chunk of her life hating the gays and banging on about family values. You know, that kind of shit. Only when she died in 2002 did things move in a much more liberal direction. So let's recap for a second. One woman, in the unelected House of Lords, able to enforce discrimination on millions of people.
I love democracy.
But hope wasn't all lost. In Scotland, it was actually repealed in 2000. It was one of the first landmark reforms of the then new Scottish Parliament, but it wasn't without opposition. Brian Souter, the owner of Stagecoach Buses, famously started a private referendum on whether they should keep the clause. He sent a ballot to most houses in Scotland and waited for a response. The response from the public was rightfully ridicule. Of course, Souter's defence was the usual blah 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 family values spiel as an excuse to enforce bigotry on other people, and a spokesperson for him at the time famously said he did it because he was a committed Christian.
Yeah, I would have gone for a different C word.
Eventually, a motion to repeal it finally came to the House of Commons. Now, it did pass 368 to 76, but doing some quick maths, that leaves a lot of abstained votes. A lot of the Tory modernisers, like David Cameron, Theresa May, disgraced Foreign Secretary Liam Fox, all abstained. Anne Widdecombe voted to keep it, but that's not really much of a surprise, is it? Looking at the list on theyworkforyou.com, there are some really disappointing finds in there, so I've put them all on screen for you to enjoy. Try and find your local MP. Bloody hell, this is a long list. We almost done? And so, by the end of 2003, you could say this sentence in a UK school and not get a disciplinary. Gay people exist. Knowing that Section 28 was a thing, even in this century, is depressing. The fact that people 20 years ago were happy to discriminate based on people's sexuality, and in the sort of numbers that meant that keeping it was a politically viable option, is disgraceful. And I'm not going to act like repealing Section 28 magically fixed everything. It didn't. There was still a lot of homophobic injustice in the world, and even in the UK. But it was an important stepping stone. Sure, the next year we got civil partnerships, now we can finally enjoy marriage. Then a couple of years later we got same-sex marriage, actual marriage, that we could enjoy. And of course the journey to full equality is still a long way to go. Even when I went to school I experienced a lot of homophobia. One day we won't have to deal with that, I'm sure. But until that day, we need to keep the fight going. And I think that brings us to the end of our gay little adventure. Thank you very much for watching, and good night. Oh, it's July 1st. Now we're back to real history. What happened during World War II? To find out what happened during D-Day and World War II, click there. And if you want to know what happened at the Battle of Normandy, click there. And if you want to know about Hitler and Mussolini and Stalin and Mussolini, click here. That is real history, right? History is a series of linear events that happened between 1939 and 45, right?